Hi holograms, it's new! I was recently featured in a Wall Street Journal article about at-home ketamine therapy. That's me, on my humble little futon in my fairy princess room. Also, my box of ketamine from Peak on my fluffy blanket. I already did a vlog about the ketamine infusions that I got back in 2020, so go watch that if you haven't already. But now that this article came out and there's been this big ketamine boom and my clinic has closed, I think it's time to finally talk about what the at-home experience has been like for me, because it's been way different. I started at-home ketamine in March 2022 and have been documenting the experience on my blog. But I also wanted to make a video to talk about it and to address the article. But because of my other health conditions, it's really hard for me to sit up like this and talk for a long time, which is why I haven't really been making vlogs and have been focusing more on micro content. So the majority of this video, I'm actually going to recline in my floor chair and use my mic and talk about this in a comfortable way, that way I won't trigger a terrible flare-up. If you want to know more about my accessible floor desk setup, I have a couple of videos about that and a whole floor desk FAQ, so check my link tree for the link to that. So first I want to address the article and the, uncharitable responses it got. I really had to weigh my pros and cons when deciding whether or not to agree to being interviewed. The Wall Street Journal reached out to me via one of my tweets about at-home ketamine. It was actually kind of a Moon Knight shitpost tweet because I thought it was so uncanny how Moon Knight resonated so much with my K-therapy, and that apparently Mooney is associated with all of these ketamine memes. Love it. The journalist I talked to was great. She was really respectful, made sure I was comfortable with every question and everything. We had a good time talking on the phone about neurology, mental health, trauma, and more. I knew going into this that the article was about getting both sides. The doctors expressing concerns about the safety of at-home treatments, but also patients like me who had a good, safe experience and who have been saved by ketamine, especially being able to access it at home as a disabled person. But I also knew, okay, Wall Street Journal has pretty conservative readers in general, and since it's the internet, I'd be potentially exposing myself to a lot of gross consciousness that are cut off from basic empathy and compassion, as well as critical thinking and maturity. I decided to go ahead and do the interview because I felt it was important to get my story out there, even though I knew there would be plenty of fear-mongering, ableism, and, transphobia. We'll get to that in a second. New, a 32-year-old actor and video game model in Los Angeles, was prescribed 100 milligrams of ketamine online last year by Peak Health Global Incorporated and took the medication with someone nearby. Mix Valentine, who uses they as a pronoun, said they graduated to 150 milligram doses and took that alone. Ketamine alleviated symptoms of treatment-resistant depression and PTSD. Things are joyful again, even though I'm in pain, Mix Valentine said. So, little correction here, at the time of the article being posted and of me recording this, it is still 2022, and they're saying that last year is when I was prescribed at-home ketamine, which is incorrect. It was March 2022 that I started at-home ketamine. Also, they totally fumbled, like, who uses they as a pronoun. Like, no, it's who uses they them pronouns, not use the they as a pronoun. I think they were just a little bit clumsy and sloppy with that. Just a critique. Anyway, for background, I'm a neurodivergent childhood abuse and trauma survivor. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and dissociation is a regular thing for me. It's just how my body-mind learned to survive, so it's literally programmed into how I experience life. But because suicidality comes with all of that, I almost didn't survive childhood, adolescence, or early adulthood. Part of it was because the abuse was still going on and I hadn't yet, extricated myself from toxic friend groups and, a toxic family system, but I'm also disabled due to multiple chronic illnesses. I'm diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which was formerly known as chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, type 2 narcolepsy, scoliosis, osteoarthritis, degenerative disc disease, bulging discs, and more. I'm suspected to have endometriosis to the point where I'm basically diagnosed, but not really, since I can't access a specialist or excision surgery. And I've also been quote-unquote suspected for MS for 3 years, since ME and fibromyalgia are considered the precursors to it, and I have all of the symptoms, but nothing really substantial shows up on my MRIs. So it's just kind of a big question mark. Now I'm being vaguely monitored for lymphoma because my lymph nodes are slightly enlarged and there's a lesion in my colon. I had to do a PET scan and blood work, it's a whole thing, but I think it's related to the colitis and endometriosis. As you can imagine, I'm in a lot of pain every single day. But I'm still not considered disabled enough for benefits because according to Social Security, I can still move my arms and legs in a satisfactory manner. But here I am losing the ability to sit up over the past 3 years, which is why I had to record this reclining and not do a regular vlog like I normally would. I just can't sit up for that long anymore. It's really, really painful and would require a lot of recovery time. As you may have noticed, none of this except the depression and PTSD were mentioned in the article. I'm guessing it's because they wanted to focus on the mental health aspect of it. I even asked them if they could make sure to say it was C-PTSD, but they didn't. So there's a lot more to my ketamine therapy than just my mental health. Ketamine not only helps treat trauma disorders, but it's an immunoregulator and can help with chronic illness and chronic pain as well. It's definitely not enough to completely get rid of my intense and varied pain, but I can tell that it's given me more wiggle room before my ME or fibro pain flares. Of course, most of the responses to this article were along the lines of, "Wow, this is so sad. Why are we giving people horse tranquilizers?" Just a lot of ignorant stuff said by people who didn't bother to do their research. And as I mentioned before, transphobia. Yeah, so that was a concern I had going into this. I'm trans non-binary and gender fluid. All pronouns are appropriate for me, so I don't really care what's used. Some of my friends call me he, others switch it up. It's all good. There's no way to misgender me with pronouns. But the Wall Street Journal needed to only use one pronoun set for me, and they really wanted to honor my gender. I could have so easily just let them she, her, and Miss Hologram me, and then the comments would have just been ableist, right? But I thought, nah, I stopped hiding who I am a long time ago. So I let them go with they, them, and mix. And the transphobes outed themselves with these lovely comments.
"The last thing we need are people like Valentine, already a freak, also on mind-altering drugs."
I do have to commend this Thomas Hall person, though. Their replies are pretty great. "Filled up with Christian love, I see."
He or she or it, not a plural. Anyone who wants it can have mix.
Side note, I love that people actually don't know which pronoun to enforce upon me because they can't tell. That's actually really affirming that people can't tell. Thank you.
Or better still, why don't we quit catering to the mentally disturbed by perpetuating their belief in the myth of transgender or gender fluid or anything but male-female? As long as we let these people draw us into their crazy world, there will be no end. Eventually they will identify as toothbrushes or bumblebees. I wish I were joking.
I actually had a video I did in early 2022 where I challenge and break down these kinds of transphobic beliefs. Link below.
No wonder you are on drugs.
What's the logic here? That I'm mentally ill and that's why I'm trans and that's why I'm on drugs? Like, I don't understand what this person's trying to imply.
If you've been diagnosed with a mental health issue, you cannot legally acquire a firearm, which is a constitutional right. Seems like you should lose your constitutional right to vote also. Both can cause damage to other people.
We're not even going to unpack that. Thomas Hall had another comment that I really liked. "A world that shoves complex human behavior into only two categories based on a Bronze Age understanding of biology is the more disturbing vision in that it is divorced from the subtleties of the human brain." Thank you, Thomas. This last comment isn't transphobic, but it deserves an honorable mention.
Holy cow, just go for a nice walk.
Oh my god, Robert, I never thought of that, with all of my trauma and nightmares and flashbacks and triggers and surviving suicide my whole life and I just never thought to go on a walk. I guess the walks that I already go on every morning, I guess that wasn't really a walk? Maybe there's something I'm doing wrong, Robert. People are so interesting, but I've been wondering, what if I had asked the Wall Street Journal to just use he, him, and Mr.? What would the response have been with my flapper hair, pastels, and princess curtains? It probably would have been even more divisive.
Look at this freak
Look!
ketamine, no wonder they're
Listen!
up.
And people trying to link my mental illness with being trans and queer. It's like, no. I'm mentally ill because I survived near daily trauma and abuse from a very young age. I'm not trans because I'm mentally ill. I would have been trans even if I hadn't grown up in a toxic family system, or been bullied and tormented nearly every day at school for being autistic and queer. I was already queer. Why do you think I was bullied? Okay, so with commentary about the article out of the way, let's talk about my at-home ketamine experience. Since my ketamine infusions in 2020, I'd been working my ass off trying to save up for more. They're like $600 a pop now, and my insurance won't cover them at all. In my desperation for relief, I kept going back to the pain management doctor who gave me the infusions. He gave me an epidural steroid injection in my upper spine, which was honestly traumatic and made the pain so much worse. I was unable to move my neck for 2 to 3 weeks, and the nerve pain from using my hands was like being electrocuted. Since it was unsuccessful, the doctor told me that this is indication for spinal surgery, but I never got anywhere with it because the surgeon doesn't think my bulging discs are that bad. Then the pain management doctor broke up with me. He said I'm too complex a case for him to treat. Yeah, this is a common experience for spoonies, unfortunately. I was in a really bad place, unable to remove myself from an environment where I was surrounded by triggers and where my personhood and emotional reality were not being respected. So I didn't want to give up on myself, you know? This is about me and surviving. So I began researching other ketamine doctors and discovered that there are online virtual ketamine clinics that send ketamine to your home. At first, I didn't know how I felt about it. But with more research, I felt more confident that it was the right way to go. I looked up so many testimonials from these different clinics to weed out the ones that were shady. Mind Bloom, unfortunately, is considered the better help of at-home ketamine, so I stayed the hell away from them. Funny enough, they replied to one of my tweets where I mentioned ketamine therapy, and I was not having it. Seriously, their Twitter account is going around responding to vulnerable mentally ill people like, "Ketamine could help with that, ooh." And that makes me super uncomfortable. Stop it. In the end, I decided to go with Peak, not only because I liked their system, but because they were the most affordable at the time. I started with them right before the big ketamine boom of 2022, so my monthly maintenance fee was around $196. But I think for the first month it was $296 because they had a slightly different system and I was like a new patient. I can't remember exactly, I'm sorry. I know that not everyone has had a positive experience with Peak, but I guess the angel of medicine was really looking out for me because I got so lucky. The doctor within the clinic that I chose turned out to be a perfect fit. They were also neurodivergent, and so they understood so much about my trauma. In my patient submission form, I went into detail about each of my diagnoses and suspected diagnoses so that the provider would have a full picture of what was going on with my body-mind. Physically, mentally, emotionally, even spiritually. It's a hallucinogenic, so for a lot of people that's part of it. But I think that if you're not already a spiritual person, it's not going to make you spiritual, so I wouldn't worry about that. They do need to know your medical history because ketamine isn't safe if you have certain heart conditions or even certain mental illnesses. Since I'd already had infusions before, I was sort of already cleared, but they were very thorough with my medical chart to be safe. I started out on the lowest dose of 100 milligrams every 4 days. My depression and PTSD were really, really bad at that time, so I definitely needed it that frequently. When I got used to that dose, we upped it to 150 milligrams and kept it there ever since. Luckily, I'm a lightweight, so that's been enough for me. After a while, we stretched it to every 5 days, then every 7. Then I did every 14, and now I just do it once a month. That's how stable I've become. So to talk about the actual ketamine, it comes in a troche? I'm not sure which pronunciation is correct since everyone seems to say it differently, but it's basically a dissolvable. They told me to have a sitter present, and I did that for the first couple months of treatment. After that, I felt experienced and safe enough to do it on my own, even if I couldn't have someone nearby. But I would still have a friend on call just in case. Like, hey, it's K-Day, can you be on call just in case I have a rough time, or if something unpredictable happens like an earthquake? That definitely made me feel a lot better about it. So yeah, these things taste pretty nasty, and you have to hold it in your mouth for 15 minutes. At first, they instruct you to spit it out after that time, since about 25 to 30% of the ketamine will have absorbed through your mouth. But after I got used to it, they said if I felt ready to go deeper, that I could swallow the ketamine after that 15 minutes to get more of it in my system. When I swallow it, it's kind of like 2 trips in one. I have the initial one from my mouth, and then a second one when it hits my gut. I was told that the trips would be a lot more mellow when K is taken orally than the infusions, but in my experience, they're still pretty strong. It depends. Some days I have mellow trips with minimal visuals, other days I have more intense deep dives. Ketamine is a dissociative, so I think that's why it's kind of familiar to me. I experience dissociation a lot anyway, so being out of my body isn't that scary to me. In general, ketamine kind of feels like dying, but not in a negative way. It's as if I've been separated from this human incarnation, and I'm getting a whole different perspective on my life and myself as a person. So when I remember that I get to go back and be me in this life, I feel so happy. I feel so privileged, you know? Like, oh my god, I get to go back. The visuals can be really interesting too. I go into more detail on my blog, but I've had some curious encounters with different entities, or even like going through an MRI scan of my body, or being in a control room full of screens showing thousands of different incarnations playing out at once. I can tell you that when I've had a rough PTSD week, it really drags me through the past. It's kind of like WandaVision or Moon Knight, you know, like kind of like going through your childhood, going through different traumatic events. It's very quick, lots of quick shifts through memories, and it can be really intense, so I always make sure to have stuffed animals and other soothing things nearby. Luckily, my cats are very perceptive and will come over to like sit on my legs if they sense that I'm struggling, so it's nice to have my little babies near me. Oh man, and then when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I was still trying to coordinate my endometriosis surgery and looking into like a partial hysterectomy. So I got sent to the uterus dimension. That was not fun. Terrifying and gross. But I've yet to have a bad trip. Rough trips, yes, but not bad or traumatic ones that would put me off of K forever. I'm very lucky, but again, I'm still on a pretty low dose and I'm a lightweight. I already struggle with nausea, and ketamine can make me feel pretty sick, so they also sent me plenty of Zofran to take 30 minutes before. Even then, I've had a few pukey times, like mostly because I forgot to turn on the AC before I started, so getting up to do it made me super dizzy, and then that would make me throw up. So now I keep a little puke bucket or bowl nearby just in case. I've only had one day so far where I felt so sick the rest of the day and couldn't keep any food down, but I was also flaring and it was right before my period started, so I might have just been extra sensitive. As for the positive effect of the ketamine, it's been very similar to what I felt from the infusions. Most of the time, it's an instant switch, but sometimes it might take 6 hours or even a few days for the feeling to really be grounded into my mind. It's a deep sense of love for myself that feels so unnatural to me, which I know is a common experience for childhood trauma survivors. It's so unfamiliar to feel just this sense of being held, being loved unconditionally. Because I've never been able to love myself due to my perception being abused since childhood. My programming was always just that I was a bad person because my family and my bullies were always broadcasting the message that I was a burden, I was a problem, an annoyance, a brat, a weirdo, a freak. So of course that's the way I grew up to see myself. At first, I was definitely still very much in my constant depression baseline where I'd be like, yeah, it's been 4 days, it's definitely time for K again. Especially because I think I might have PMDD because in the 2 weeks before my period, I usually lose the will to live. If that sounds extreme, it is. It's awful. But ketamine has basically gotten rid of that, and now I barely have PMS depression the day right before my period starts, so it's really manageable. The way ketamine has transformed my depression and C-PTSD is that it has rewired my internal framework. Even though I'd done so much trauma work on my own for nearly a decade, I still had this major block. And since antidepressants don't work on me, ketamine really has been the perfect fit to get me over that final hurdle. Trauma work truly is a lifelong thing, but to finally be on the other side of this for once is wild. I keep telling my therapist, like, this is so weird. I'm almost waiting for the other shoe to drop because I'm not used to feeling so stable. So she's been helping me to get comfortable and familiar and curious even with this new mental place that I find myself in. It's definitely more complicated because unfortunately I am still forced to be in contact with some of the people who traumatized me, so I am often re-traumatized by their refusal to hold themselves accountable for the harm they caused. It's a lot of like minimization, emotional laziness, gaslighting still. They're not strong enough to face themselves and to own up to what they did and the harm that was caused because they're untouchable. Like, oh, that's just the way I am. And it's like I said, it's emotional laziness, and I can't do anything about that. That's their work to do, and it's not my job to do the work for them and to like forgive them. My job is to heal, and forgiveness is not in the healing package for a lot of people, and it's definitely not for me. It's a weakness of theirs that is not my burden to bear anymore. So even if there's still emotional abuse and abusive perception going on, and I still have those triggers, I'm a lot stronger in my knowing that it's not me, that the problem is them and their immaturity and their unwillingness to get professional help. Isn't that just the gag though? Like, here I am with an entire mental health team doing ketamine therapy because of how high risk I am for suicide, but the people who hurt me refuse to acknowledge that they have mental and emotional problems which caused my trauma. Yikes. Like, I love you, family. I love you to death. I seriously love my family so much. And I do miss them, like the ones that I can't have contact with anymore because they're just not safe for me to be around. But like, I wish that they would get help. I would love to have a relationship with them. I would love to talk to them about my life and what's going on with me. But they've proven that they're not safe. And it sucks. It's painful. No one ever talks about that. I'm not having a good time cutting contact with certain family members. Like, I'm a lot happier and healthier. It's better this way. But it's a very complicated place to be. And I wish them healing. So on top of all of that, the medical stress of 2022 was terrible. It was rough. I really honestly don't know if I would have survived the year without ketamine to help give me that safety net. I had over 100 doctor appointments, trying to coordinate surgery, even just get basic care, right? My pain is severe and my level of disability is much higher than it was before. It's a lot of suffering and being held back and not being seen or heard. The medical trauma has been enough in the past to put me into suicidal episodes, so having ketamine literally gave me the ability to process everything and keep fighting for my care. But now, even though I went through so much this year and still can't access the major surgery that I need, I have a sense of hope that I don't think I would have had if I didn't have ketamine to help me process and rewire my brain. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I was denied disability, so I can't really take time off to rest. I'm constantly stuck in between working myself into flare-ups and recovering from flare-ups. But ketamine has given me the ground beneath my feet to stay stable upon. Sadly, Peak has closed due to laws around telemedicine changing. They gave me information on other clinics in my area, but they're all way, way more expensive. So after my last dose, this will be the end of my ketamine therapy for now. I know realistically that relapses are still possible, but I feel good about this. My brain has changed so much and I have such a good foundation even though I'm still up against daily triggers and traumas. I feel like I can handle whatever life throws at me. If I'm triggered, I know what to do to take care of myself. I have good friends, a good workplace, amazing followers, a great community, loving cats. I can do this. I'm so thankful to Peak and my provider for being there for me to get me through such an intense, transformational year. I hope that one day I can continue with ketamine therapy if I need it. But for now, I'm focusing on doing what makes me happy, while still fighting for my care. That's it for today, holograms. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I was able to answer your questions about at-home ketamine therapy. If you have any others that weren't answered in this video or on my other things, please let me know and I'll try to answer them for you. I also have to give a really big heartfelt thank you to everyone who donated to my GoFundMe early in 2022. I wouldn't have been able to start at-home ketamine therapy without your help, and I was in a really bad place. I owe my survival this year and my healing to you. So thank you so much. Even though my ketamine therapy journey is ending soon, I still have my GoFundMe up just for general medical expenses. I also have a Ko-fi and a Patreon if you want to support my content and help me stay on top of medication and supplements. If you become a monthly supporter on Patreon, you'll get your name in my end screen and you'll also get an invite to my hologram Discord server where we talk about art and memes and video games and self-care and everything else. Also, a big thank you to all of my friends and followers who were there for me through this really, really hard year. It was a lot of pain and frustration and disappointment with the medical system as usual, and also a lot of work on childhood trauma. Like, it's not a fun place to be, but it was necessary for me to really tackle it head on with the ketamine therapy and everything else that I do with my therapist, my mental health team, journaling, all of it. Doing the post-mortem on your childhood is not easy. It's incredibly intense. One day I will do a video about that, even if it pisses off my family, because we don't need our family's permission or approval to talk about the reality of our childhood. Shout out to my superstar holograms! I love you so much! I leave you all with a healing good luck kiss, and may the spoons be with you. Bye!